There comes a quiet moment in every life when the soul grows tired of struggling, when the heart finally admits what the ego has been resisting all along. You were never meant to do this alone. Not the healing, not the figuring out, not the endless planning, controlling, fixing, proving, and defending. You were never designed to carry the weight of existence on your own shoulders, as if life were a problem to be solved rather than a mystery to be lived. And yet, from the moment you learned how to think, you were taught subtly and relentlessly that survival depends on effort, that worth depends on performance, that safety comes from control. So you learned to tighten your grip. You learned to brace yourself against life. You learned to fight. But listen closely now, because the deepest wisdom is always gentle. The force that created you did not place you here to exhaust you. The intelligence that moves the stars into place did not forget how to guide a single human heart. What you call God, or Source, or the universe, or divine intelligence, is not distant, judgmental, or conditional. It is intimate. It is present. It is closer than your next breath, and it has been guiding you long before you learned how to interfere. Every moment of anxiety is a signal, not that something is wrong with you, but that you are trying to manage life from a level that was never meant to be in charge. Overthinking is not wisdom. Resistance is not strength. Control is not clarity. These are the habits of a frightened ego that believes it must constantly be on guard or else everything will fall apart. But notice this. Despite all your planning, all your worrying, all your self-criticism and effort, life has continued to unfold in ways you could never have predicted. Love found you when you weren't ready. Loss arrived when you thought you were prepared. Opportunities appeared out of nowhere. Doors closed without explanation. And through it all, something unseen kept moving you forward, shaping you, refining you, teaching you. That something is not outside of you. It is within you. It is the same intelligence that beats your heart without asking permission, that heals your body without consulting your fears, that causes intuition to rise quietly when the mind is loud. The soul always knows, and the soul does not shout. It does not argue. It does not rush. It waits patiently for you to stop fighting long enough to listen. Letting God lead is not a passive surrender to fate. It is an active release of the illusion that you were ever meant to micromanage the universe. It is the realization that when you stop forcing outcomes, a deeper order reveals itself. When you stop resisting what is, clarity emerges. When you stop trying to control everything, life begins to cooperate in ways that feel almost miraculous, not because the universe has suddenly changed, but because you have stopped blocking the flow. You see, the ego believes that letting go means losing. The soul knows that letting go means being carried. The ego asks, "What if I fail?" The soul whispers, "What if you're supported?" The ego scans the past for mistakes and projects the future for threats, dragging you away from the only place where guidance exists, this moment. Because God does not live in your regrets or your worries. Divine intelligence expresses itself now, always now, through the feeling in your chest when something is true, through the quiet discomfort that tells you a path is misaligned, through the unexpected calm that arrives when you stop arguing with reality. Think of how exhausting it is to swim upstream, convinced that effort alone will get you where you want to go. And then imagine what it feels like to turn around and let the current carry you, not lazily, not unconsciously, but with trust. You still move. You still choose. You still act. But you are no longer fighting the river. You are cooperating with it. That is what it means to let God lead. It is alignment, not abdication. So much suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from our insistence that life should be different than it is. Resentment, anger, bitterness, and regret are all forms of resistance. They are the mind saying, "I know better than life," and yet there are no justified resentments. They all weigh the same on the soul. Forgiveness, then, is not a moral obligation. It is a spiritual liberation. When you forgive, you are not excusing behavior. You are releasing yourself from the prison of carrying it. You are saying, "I trust that there is a larger intelligence at work here than my need to be right." The moment you stop fighting the past, it loses its power over you. The moment you stop replaying old stories, you reclaim your energy. The moment you stop identifying with wounds, you remember who you are beneath them. You are not your history. You are not your failures. You are not your trauma. You are the awareness that has been witnessing it all. And that awareness is inherently whole, inherently worthy, inherently guided. God does not lead through fear. Fear is the language of the ego. God leads through peace, not the kind of peace that depends on everything going your way, but the kind that remains even when it doesn't. A peace that says, I don't understand this yet, but I trust. A peace that knows that delays are not denials, that detours are not mistakes, that endings are often disguised beginnings. When you learn to rest in that peace, decisions become simpler, not easier, but clearer. You stop asking, what will make me look successful, and start asking, what feels aligned. You stop chasing approval and start honoring truth. And here is the most liberating realization of all. You are already enough. You do not need to earn divine support. You do not need to deserve guidance. You do not need to perfect yourself before life responds. The source that created you did not make a mistake. You are a divine being having a human experience, not a flawed human trying to become spiritual. When you know this, not intellectually, but experientially, you stop striving for worth and start expressing it. Let God lead you through the ordinary moments, through conversations, through choices, through silence. Guidance is not always dramatic. Often it shows up as a subtle nudge, a sense of ease, a feeling of contraction or expansion. Trust those signals. They are the language of alignment. When something requires constant force, constant justification, constant anxiety, pause. That is not the voice of divine intelligence. When something unfolds with a quiet sense of rightness, even if it scares you, that is the soul saying, this way. You were never meant to face life alone. You were meant to be in relationship with it. To listen as much as you act. To trust as much as you plan. To surrender not your power, but your resistance. And when you do, something extraordinary happens. The burden lightens. The noise softens. The path clarifies. You realize that you have been guided through every dark night, every loss, every turning point, not despite your pain, but through it. So stop fighting. Stop overthinking. Stop trying to control what was never meant to be controlled. Breathe. Trust. Listen. Let yourself be led by the same intelligence that turns seeds into forests and wounds into wisdom. You are not alone. You never were. And the moment you remember that, life stops feeling like a battle and starts feeling like a conversation, one in which you are loved, supported, and gently guided home. And as you settle into that remembering, something subtle begins to change inside you. The urgency softens. The constant need to know what comes next loosens its grip. You begin to sense that clarity is not something you chase, but something that arrives when the mind becomes still enough to receive it. Life starts to speak to you in quieter ways, in the pause between thoughts, in the space after a question, in the calm that follows acceptance. You discover that guidance does not always come as answers, but often as a deep inner yes or no that requires no explanation. This is the language of a higher intelligence, one that communicates through resonance rather than words. You may notice that when you stop forcing outcomes, unexpected support appears. A conversation arrives at the perfect moment. A door closes gently instead of slamming shut. A delay reveals itself as protection. None of this is random. There is an order beneath the surface of things, a choreography that the ego cannot see because it is too busy trying to direct the dance. But when you step back and allow yourself to be moved instead of pushing, you begin to feel held by life rather than opposed by it. This is where true strength is born, not in effort, but in alignment. Not in tension, but in trust. Strength is the willingness to remain open when fear tells you to close. It is the courage to say, I don't know, and remain peaceful anyway. It is the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you are guided by something far more intelligent than your personal anxieties. When you operate from this place, your actions become more effective because they are no longer fueled by desperation. They are guided by clarity. Notice how different it feels to move from inspiration rather than obligation. Obligation drains you. Inspiration energizes you. Obligation comes from fear of consequences. Inspiration arises from a sense of inner rightness. When God leads, there is an ease, even in effort, a lightness, even in responsibility. You may still work hard, but you are no longer working against yourself. You are cooperating with life rather than negotiating with it. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, your identity begins to shift. You stop seeing yourself as a fragile entity trying to survive in a hostile world. You start to experience yourself as an expression of the very force that animates the world. This is not arrogance. It is humility at its deepest level, the humility to recognize that you are part of something vast, intelligent, and benevolent. When you know this, comparison fades. Envy dissolves. The need to prove yourself loses meaning. You are no longer asking, "Am I enough?" because you are living from the knowing that you already are. Healing happens naturally in this state, not because you are trying to fix yourself, but because you have stopped arguing with who you are. Resistance is what keeps wounds alive. Acceptance is what allows them to transform. When you meet your pain with compassion instead of judgment, it softens. When you stop identifying with your suffering, it begins to teach rather than torment. The moment you stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What is this revealing in me?" you shift from victimhood into wisdom. Let yourself be guided even through uncertainty, especially through uncertainty. Growth rarely comes with guarantees. Transformation often arrives disguised as confusion, but the soul recognizes expansion even when the mind feels lost. Trust that discomfort does not mean misalignment. Sometimes it means you are shedding an old identity that no longer fits. Sometimes it means you are standing at the edge of a deeper truth, one that requires you to release what is familiar in order to step into what is real. And remember this, you do not need to have unwavering faith. You only need willingness. Willingness to listen, willingness to pause, willingness to soften your grip. The universe does not require perfection from you. It responds to openness. Even a small opening allows guidance to enter. Even a quiet surrender can redirect an entire life. As you walk forward, let your measure of success change. Let peace be your compass. Let inner harmony be your signal that you are moving in the right direction. When something costs you your peace, pay attention. When something restores it, honor that. This is not selfishness. This is wisdom. A peaceful mind is not a luxury. It is a doorway to higher intelligence. You were not brought here to master fear. You were brought here to remember love. Not sentimental love, but the steady, grounding awareness that you are supported by life itself. When you live from this knowing, you stop fighting shadows and start walking in light, not because everything is illuminated, but because you trust the source of illumination within you. So continue gently, breathe deeply, listen closely. Let God lead you not by force, but by invitation. Let each step be guided not by fear of what might go wrong, but by trust in what is unfolding. You are not late. You are not broken. You are not alone. You are exactly where you need to be to remember who you have always been, an expression of divine intelligence, moving steadily toward clarity, peace, and inner freedom. And in this remembering, you may feel an unfamiliar stillness, as though something inside you has finally laid down a heavy burden it did not know it was carrying. This stillness is not emptiness. It is fullness without noise. It is the presence that remains when the constant commentary of the mind softens and you sense yourself existing without effort. Here, you are not striving to become anything, you are simply being. And in this being, life begins to respond differently to you, not because you have changed the world, but because you have changed the way you meet it. The mind has spent a lifetime rehearsing defenses, preparing for dangers that may never arrive, replaying moments that cannot be altered. It believes vigilance is love and worry is responsibility. But vigilance exhausts the spirit, and worry closes the heart. There is another way to live, one that does not require you to abandon intelligence or discernment, but invites you to release suspicion. When you trust that life is fundamentally supportive, your nervous system relaxes, your perceptions sharpen, and intuition rises naturally to the surface, you stop bracing for impact and start noticing beauty. Beauty has always been speaking to you in the way light moves across a room, in the cadence of your breath when you are no longer rushing, in the quiet joy of being present without an agenda. These moments are not trivial. They are reminders. They whisper that life is not against you. They invite you to return to a rhythm that existed long before fear taught you to hurry. When you allow God to lead, you discover that timing has its own intelligence. What you once perceived as waiting reveals itself as preparation. What felt like stagnation becomes incubation. Seeds grow in darkness, not because something has gone wrong, but because growth requires unseen stages. Trusting this process means releasing the demand for immediate proof. It means honoring what is forming beneath the surface even when there is no visible progress to point to. Faith is not believing without evidence. It is trusting the invisible forces that have always sustained you. And as you trust, your relationship with effort changes. You no longer push from anxiety, you move from inspiration. Action becomes a response rather than a reaction. You begin to sense when to speak and when to remain silent, when to move forward and when to rest. This discernment does not come from analysis, it arises from alignment. When your inner state is peaceful, your choices tend to be wise. When your inner state is chaotic, even the best plans unravel. Peace, then, is not a byproduct of success. It is the foundation of it. There is profound freedom in realizing that you do not need to control life to participate fully in it. Control is the mind's attempt to guarantee safety in an unpredictable world. Trust is the soul's recognition that safety does not come from certainty, but from connection. When you feel connected to something greater than your individual identity, uncertainty becomes less threatening. You can walk into the unknown without fear because you are no longer walking alone. This connection is not something you must earn. It is something you remember. It has always been present, quietly waiting beneath layers of conditioning, expectation, and self-doubt. Every time you choose kindness over judgment, presence over distraction, acceptance over resistance, you strengthen this connection. You tune yourself to a frequency where guidance flows naturally, without strain or force. You may find that as you live this way, others respond differently to you. Not because you are trying to influence them, but because your energy has shifted. Peace is contagious. Authenticity invites trust. When you are no longer trying to convince the world of your worth, the world senses your ease and meets you there. Relationships soften. Conflicts lose their charge. Even challenges feel less personal, less heavy, less defining. And when difficulties do arise, as they inevitably will, you meet them with a different posture. You no longer ask, why is this happening to me? But how can I remain open here? Openness transforms pain into insight. It allows hardship to shape you without hardening you. This is where true resilience lives, not in resistance, but in receptivity. Let yourself rest in the understanding that life is not a test you must pass, but an experience meant to awaken you. You are not being evaluated, you are being invited. Invited to trust more deeply, to love more freely, to release the stories that keep you small and step into the truth that you are guided, supported, and deeply connected. So continue forward with gentleness. Let your steps be unhurried. Let your choices be informed by inner clarity rather than external pressure. When you feel lost, pause. When you feel afraid, soften. When you feel overwhelmed, remember that you are not the source of life's intelligence, you are its expression. Allow that intelligence to move through you, to guide you, to remind you that you were never meant to fight your way through existence. You were meant to flow, to trust, to listen, to be led. And in that leading, you will find not only direction, but home. And as this flowing trust settles more deeply into your awareness, you may notice that life no longer feels like a series of obstacles to overcome, but a sequence of invitations to soften. Each situation, pleasant or painful, begins to feel like a teacher rather than a threat. You stop asking life to bend to your will and begin allowing it to reveal its wisdom. In this shift, the heart opens in ways the mind could never strategize, and you discover that guidance is not something added to your life, but something uncovered when the noise subsides. There is a profound humility in realizing that you do not have to understand everything to be at peace. The need for certainty dissolves when you recognize that understanding has limits, but trust does not. Trust asks nothing of the future. It asks only that you remain present and receptive. And in that receptivity, intuition becomes clearer, like a compass that steadies itself when you stop shaking it with doubt. You begin to feel when something aligns with your deeper truth, even if it challenges your comfort. You sense when something is complete, even if your ego wants to cling. This knowing is quiet, unmistakable, and kind. As you walk this path, you may find old habits loosening their hold without effort. The urge to explain yourself diminishes. The compulsion to defend your choices fades. You no longer feel responsible for managing other people's perceptions or carrying their expectations. This is not indifference, it is freedom. When you are guided by a higher intelligence, approval loses its currency. Inner harmony becomes the measure by which you live, and it simplifies everything. Time itself begins to feel different. Moments stretch. Presence deepens. You are less haunted by what has been and less anxious about what might come. The present moment becomes rich enough, full enough, to hold your attention without distraction. Here, life feels intimate. Ordinary experiences carry a quiet sacredness. Eating, walking, listening, each becomes an opportunity to reconnect with the intelligence that animates all things. You realize that awakening is not an event reserved for mountaintops or miracles. It is a continual return to awareness in the midst of daily life. When challenges arise, as they always will, you meet them from this grounded place. You no longer collapse into them or harden against them. You stand with them, breathing, listening, allowing insight to emerge rather than forcing solutions. Often, the answer is not an action, but a shift in perception. When you change the way you see a situation, its grip on you loosens. What once felt overwhelming becomes workable. What once felt threatening becomes instructive. This is the quiet power of alignment. You may notice that forgiveness becomes less of a struggle and more of a natural response. Not because wounds never occurred, but because carrying them feels unnecessary. Forgiveness arises when you see clearly that holding on to resentment keeps you anchored to the past. Releasing it is not an act of generosity toward others. It is an act of respect for your own peace. As forgiveness deepens, energy returns, vitality renews. You feel lighter, not because life has changed, but because you have stopped carrying what no longer belongs to you. There is a deep compassion that grows within you as well, one that extends inward before it moves outward. You learn to treat your own fears, missteps, and uncertainties with the same kindness you would offer a dear friend. This self-compassion is not weakness. It is strength rooted in understanding. When you stop waging war against yourself, the inner conflict dissolves, and the guidance you seek flows more freely. Living this way does not mean life becomes effortless, but it becomes meaningful. Even effort feels purposeful when it is aligned. Even difficulty carries dignity when it is met with awareness. You stop measuring your life by achievements alone and begin sensing its value in moments of presence, connection, and inner peace. Success becomes less about accumulation and more about attunement, how closely you are listening to the quiet wisdom within. And through it all, a gentle assurance grows stronger. You are being led, not hurried, not punished, not tested. Led toward greater clarity, led toward deeper compassion, led toward the remembrance that you are not separate from the source of life, but an expression of it. This knowing does not demand belief. It reveals itself through experience, through the felt sense of being supported even when the path is unclear. So continue with patience and trust. Allow life to unfold without constant interference. Let guidance arrive in its own timing and form. When doubt appears, acknowledge it gently and return to the present. When fear whispers, breathe and listen more deeply. You are learning a different way of being, one that honors effort without idolizing it, that values planning without clinging to outcomes, that embraces mystery without fear. You were never meant to fight your way through life. You were meant to be carried by it, guided by it, shaped by its quiet intelligence. And as you surrender not your will, but your resistance, you will find yourself moving with a steadiness that does not depend on certainty and a peace that does not require conditions. This is what it means to let God lead. It is not a destination you arrive at, but a relationship you remember one breath, one moment, one gentle surrender at a time.